Today I'm going to be studying from Something is Killing the Children, the art book. I picked out 2 pages to study from, one that is introducing our main character and then another that is in a completely dark scene. I wanted to compare and contrast how Werther Dell'Edera handles different situations of light and dark, among other things. So stay tuned, see how I do it. Okay, so first things first, I always have my pencils ready to go so that way I can jump straight into the inking when it's time to ink. I started with the first panel, which had the trees, and I tried to block in all the dark parts first, and then I used some smaller variations of lines to push the trees back into the forest in order to show depth. The second panel was a little bit harder because it was kind of just the way it was drawn in there. It's a simple panel, but having her in this wagon and then posed in a way, I really struggled because it was already a tiny panel, and then me drawing an even tinier panel didn't really work too well, but I think I did the best I could. I'm really pleased with the third panel and how her face came out and the inks on her face and the look of surprise. I really think I did a good job interpreting that panel. The fourth panel was a bit of a struggle just because I really didn't understand it, the figure part of it, but I did my best there. And then the final panel, the fifth panel, with Erica Slaughter, I chose to outline her first, get in the darks, the black spot areas, and then work on the trees in the background. Dell'Edera does a lot of scratchy lines as like detail, and it's kind of hard to interpret exactly what he's trying to insinuate with those lines, but I did my best to recreate that, and I think I did a good job pushing her to the front and pushing the trees to the background as separation for just the line art. Once again, I attempted to do the teeth for her mask with a white marker, but it didn't really work out the way I intended it. So other than that, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. Okay, so I just finished the first study from Something is Killing the Children, and I actually think it went really well. I had a lot of fun playing with the shadows of the trees and the figures, but I really like how Dell'Edera uses the background to re-emphasize the mood and darkness of the overall feel. A couple things that I struggled with: Dell'Edera doesn't really have a lot of line work, so I had to kind of emphasize a couple things where maybe he used watercolor to get the point across. I just use line to emphasize certain things, like under the neck and the face areas to add shadow. Like, he did have some very fine lines, but I went a lot heavier with my line. There was one frame where if it wasn't for having the script of the story to explain exactly what was happening in that frame, I wouldn't have understood what exactly that was supposed to be. And that was panel 4. A figure starts to emerge from the trees. I wouldn't have known that if that hadn't been written there. And when I look at his rough thumbnails to his pencil layouts to the final, it's still very unclear what the hell that is. But because I had all the background information for that particular panel, I was able to try my best to work on that panel a little bit more. And I think what I did was use values to push that character forward a little bit more and then push the trees backwards, whereas I think in the original artwork it's all kind of on the same level, and maybe that's what was causing some inconsistencies for me. So far so good. Really enjoyed doing this study. I didn't do the blood that was on Erica. She's supposed to be covered in blood. I think that effect, the blood smears, weren't done in the penciling section. He did indicate that there was going to be blood in his roughs and in his thumbnails. However, I decided that maybe that's something I can revisit if I go back and color this thumbnail just to try it out. But for now, really happy with how it came out. The other little thing that I struggled with was the mask itself. At first, when I just did the pencils, I had the teeth of the mask drawn out so that way I could go back and ink around them. It was such a tiny detail that I decided to just completely black out the mask and go in with a white paint marker over top of it. But it didn't work. It wasn't successful. So maybe that's something I can fix in the digital version, like I said, when I import this and try to color it. But for now, I'm happy with how it turned out, and I'm looking forward to the next study from Something is Killing the Children. So doing the Something is Killing the Children study, it's really interesting because this page has a lot of simple shapes and simple structures. If you take away all of the details, there's actually not a lot going on. But what's great about the style that Werther Dell'Edera has is that he puts a lot of texture where you wouldn't expect it. And from this page in particular, I learned about how he uses his line to emphasize a dark scene. Like, he could have just done a flat black background in all of these panels, but he uses a lot of texture in his line. It's not all flat black, it's a variation, it's almost a gradation in all dark lines. Another thing I was noticing is how he handled water, which I thought was cool. Using the shadows to emphasize water. I would have never thought of it that way. His paneling, this is a great example of a slow reveal with the characters' reactions. The small boy watching not only the woman walking around, but this little doll that also talks. Yeah, it was just really cool how with just very, I don't want to necessarily call it simple shading, but it looks simple, but the way he uses his hatching and the direction of his shading, it really gives a very nice effect. And it just made me think that I don't have to only use flat black. I could texture the background in shades of black, and then still using that foreground, middle ground, and background to emphasize where everything is within the space. I think it's just amazing how much he's doing with seemingly so little. But I guess that is what's great about a professional artist that knows what they are doing, is that you can learn a lot in just the simplest things. Another thing I was noticing was the dynamic character portrayals, how he uses that slight tilt of the camera, those diagonal lines, just that off-center portrayal. Like, everything is not straight on. You might be looking at the character, but it's just a slight tilt to the camera that helps bring a certain dynamic feeling in just that slight tilt. And I thought that was interesting. Okay, so I just finished my second study for Something is Killing the Children, and while I was right in the middle of it, my camera completely died, so now I'm on my phone. But I wanted to get this video finished because I actually had some thoughts while I was inking, and I think the biggest takeaway I can take from doing both of these two studies is that Walter de Ladera does a lot of his own gradients, a lot of his own texture, a lot of his own details, and the fact that he's not letting the colors fill in all the details. He's actually going in his thumbnails and in his roughs and his pencils, and he's actually putting in those line variations. I think the coolest thing when I did this dark scene for Something is Killing the Children, the second page where there's this boy, he's sitting in some water, I was able to actually understand like how he used the inks to show water, and then that background is just this heavy dark line, and drawing those lines one by one, it adds a lot of edginess to the image. It's not so clean, it's not so perfect, and I think that gives a lot of character to his line work. I did struggle a little bit with it because he doesn't have like a thick line style, as far as it seems like he uses the same fine liner for all of his inks, and then he just goes back in with that same fine liner and adds in those scratchy little lines to indicate form. And for his style, I think it works perfectly. I couldn't get my lines as thin as I wanted them to be because I was using some brush pens, some calligraphy pens, and my fine liners were dying, but I think I was able to get down the ideas that I wanted. So the two big takeaways that I'm taking from Something is Killing the Children's art style is to have fun with the line, go a little bit crazy with the background, go a little bit crazy with the textures, and I can do a lot of more suggestion of backgrounds instead of having to really think about it. I mean, yeah, his settings work perfectly. One setting was a woodsy scene where the trees were emphasized, the forest was emphasized. The other was this pool or hot tub like area that had no lights whatsoever. But even with the lights being completely dark, De Ladera was able to use the lighting in a way, the contrast and values in a way that you could still see light and shape. So I had a lot of fun studying this art style, and I'm taking away a couple things that I think are going to be important in my next project. So hopefully you learned something from watching this video. Hopefully you are also trying to do your own master studies and making them easy and having fun with them. They don't have to be perfect replicas. You don't have to have the best tools, but you can learn so much from just getting into another artist's shoes. And with that, I'll see you in the next art study, which is going to be from Death Note. See you next time.